Hey everyone, welcome to another Coffee with Kittl. Today I have Rog and Cat How, and we're going to be talking more about branding. They run an amazing brand agency in London and now in Los Angeles. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, but we had a part one on a branding 101 conversation that Rog and I had, which y'all need to go check out up here in the cards if you haven't checked that out already. But this is part two. So we talked a lot logistically about things like onboarding a client, pricing, discovery sessions, proposals, all that kind of stuff. And what we're going to talk about today is what happens when a client has essentially agreed to work with you all. And now we're going to get into the actual designy stuff, the visual stuff, the visual representation of a company or a brand. So what I would like to start with is literally just that. So what happens after a client has agreed and signed on to work with you? I mean, under the assumption that you're going to be working on their branding. So we're going to work on some visual identity, visual component, graphics, logos, what have you. So just walk us through what happens when they begin to come on.
Yeah, great. I can probably talk about the first part.
Yeah.
So the handoff from the kind of new partnerships team to the creative team goes via the client services. So for all of our projects, we have a client services person who will be the project lead all the way through the life cycle of the project. So the new partnerships team has to kind of hand that project to the person who will be the project owner. And that person will book in the kind of kickoff meetings with the client, bring all the team together for an initial kind of kickoff meet to kind of take the client through what's going to happen over the next few months, the plan, do all of the intros. And then that'll be the kind of first meeting. And then we'll go into the strategy phase. And in the strategy phase, that will be a series of workshops with a strategist to really kind of get under the skin of the business, understand their marketplace, understand their customers, and understand the company as well, and everything that they do. And that all that information goes into the strategy document, and then that gets handed over to Kat's team in the design team.
Yeah. So one thing we always say in the company is, obviously people talk about brand strategy, but we always, instead of asking what is the brand strategy, we always ask what is the idea. And I think we're always trying to get this idea, this idea that defines the company, and not just defines it in words, but also it's just a really, really great springboard for the creative as well. So this is what we aim to get at the end of the strat. So the brand articulated in words. It's also at this point when we start to work on the verbal identity as well, which starts to emerge. And for us, verbal and visual identities are completely entwined. And just as you and me, you're making assumptions about how I speak and how I look, we're always judging each other by lots of different parameters. The same with the brand, how a brand talks and how it positions itself and how it looks is all part of the same package. So the verbal identity starts to be formed alongside the strat. And so we start to have a tone of voice emerge. And then our brand idea is then, something that could be really simple, could be ideally really visual. For a brand, which we did about tree planting apps, it was, get more fuzz, which I know sounds weird, but because it was all about planting trees and making the world fuzzier, then this brand idea then led to everything else. So then you've got a great brand idea, something really visual. We take it to the creative team. We look at it. We, for bigger clients, we tend to do 3 different creative routes where we can flesh out that idea, but in just 3 different manifestations of that idea. And maybe it would look like this, maybe it would look like this, maybe it would look like this. And we always have we always try and what we call create some blue sky between each of them to make sure that the client is really can choose one of these routes that each route feels really, really different, but is still obviously a manifestation of that same idea. And with other clients who perhaps it's budget restrictions, we have started to do things called territories instead. And these are looser, scrappier. They'll have a color palette and what an idea, what the logo could look like, but more refs, more mood boardy. But obviously the 3 routes option is like the team work on those for about 2 to 3 weeks each per route. So that's really like, it's quite high resolution. And then at the end of that, we love working collaboratively with our clients. So we'd have, before we got to that space, a lot of back and forths about exactly what they like tonally. And then we present those. Hopefully the client will choose one and love them all, but just choose one. And then what happens often is that they just like 2, and then they want like a mixture of the 2, or like quite often like bits from each. And we always try and not get them to do that.
We call that a shark horse. It's like where you're trying to put 2 things which are opposite together.
We don't want the shark horse.
New.
Yeah. But then, and then we just do that. We like work on the creative. Once that's signed off and that route's signed off, we then finalize it all and then get into rollout. And that can just mean exporting files, or we start to design a website and then we build that. So.
Okay, great. I want to break down some of those different processes because I feel like a lot of people, whether or not they're freelance, whether they're working at an agency or maybe even starting a small design agency, which seems to have been a trend post 2020, is everybody's starting a little design agency. I feel like that definitely sounds like a pretty consistent process that people are familiar with, is going just from start to finish and roll out with a design. What I really like that you mentioned is the what is the brand like verbally, right? So it sounds like to me, and that what I think a danger most people would be doing is tempted to start just mood boarding, right? Okay, great, you've signed on with us. Well, let's figure out what you like. And what it sounds like is that's not what you do, or at least if that's what you do, you're trying to find or start with like verbiage, emotion, language.
Yeah.
So where in the process do we move? Like maybe how long does that take, the whole kind of verbal word mapping, if you will, to then starting an ideation of visuals? Because what I'm wondering for you all is how much sway does the client have in saying like, well, I really like this. Like I'm ultra passionate about this look or this color or this style. So I kind of want to dissect the nitty gritty there before you hand something to the design team.
Yeah. When it comes to strategy, usually the question should be, what is suitable for the consumer of the brand, rather than what does the CEO of the company like. But at the same time, when you create a brand for a company, you need the company to be on board and really, get behind the brand as well. So it's also a mistake to completely ignore the team who you're making the actual brand for. So that's one of the things we do in discovery is we'll do discovery calls with the client. Sometimes we'll do taste making with them, so we get a feel for what aesthetically they like and what they're aspiring to be as a company. But then we'll also do workshops with clients as well to make sure whatever we're creating is meeting the client need and is communicating the value of the company that we've uncovered in the discovery phase in a clear and succinct way to the end consumer. And that is a combination of both visual and verbal together.
So you're asking them to show you things in that first kind of meaning you were talking about when you're just aesthetically, or are you all, is that still just in like emotional and wordage?
It's always really interesting to get refs from clients, but sometimes we find that clients don't know why they like the reference, and so it's quite difficult to unpick. Sometimes they're like, "Oh, I like Stripe," for example. We're like, "Okay, is it the color palette? Is it like?" And they're like, "No, I just sort of like the brand." We're like, "Okay," so it's okay. And so when we do the taste making, we try and make sure that we have options that we believe would work from an aesthetic point of view, but just trying to also help them articulate what they really want, because I think as designers, we are obviously very well versed in like talking about colors and talking about things that typography, but I think many clients, particularly founders, aren't obviously in this world, and so it's very difficult for them to know what they want, even though they know what they want, but they don't know why they want it or why they like it. So we do a lot of that, and I think another thing we do at this early stage, which also helps us lead a little bit is we do lots of competitor research as well in that immersion and discovery phase. And we do color wheel analysis too. And that's really helps us to say, look, in this quadrant of like blues and green, like if we're working with a fintech, it's like, look, literally all of your competitors are blue because everyone thinks blue is a trustworthy color. So let's think outside the box. Maybe what about yellow? And they're like, what? But it's always really good. It's always really good to also have that on your side where you're like, cool, you want to be different. You want to be distinctive. You want to, really stand out. So why don't we start thinking in this area? And I think it really helps when you have some information on your side and stuff to show, to almost like help your argument in that respect. So that's not really mood boarding, but it's more gathering information to try and like set your case up. And then obviously, once the strategy starts to be woven into as things as well, then obviously we can, we start to build refs as well. But always making sure that the client's on board. And this is all work that's done at the beginning. So we find that some visuals really help at this stage, but nothing that we would have actually designed ourselves.
Okay. And in this conversation, you talked a lot about color just now. Do you think that that's one of the harder conversations to get a result? So you start that conversation early about color versus something like typography or avatars?
Yeah. Do you know what? Brand color, like your signifying brand color is really important. And we're always pushing people to have one which they can own. And I think the earlier you have that conversation around that, or at least start seeding like some of those concerns around a color, the better, because it's always there's always some sort of battle on color. We work with a lot of clean tech clients and everyone wants green, and we're like, oh, we get it, but like maybe think about different, like sometimes you have to go different sorts of green, like if you look more acid green, but we're always trying to push people to do something different and out of category. And I think having those conversations earlier on about color is really important, because people have got this like real emotional connection to color, and they think they like a color because that's what they know. And obviously, if you want to create something different, then, you have to start early to try and, do that. Obviously, there are some colors which just make sense. But looking at the competitor wheel in terms of color is always really useful, because then you can really see, interestingly, we did one about design agencies when we rebranded, and like 95% of design agencies, black and white. No one has, there's only like a handful of big agencies that actually have their own color, which is mad when you think about it. But when we did it ourselves, we were like, oh my God, this is really crazy. So so it's useful to have those conversations earlier.
I think you're right. I mean, color is so powerful, and it can be a very difficult conversation with a founder or with a C-suite that knows what they like, but not why. Or like you said, I think that's the most common result is, well, everybody else has green. Everybody else has blue. Everybody else has this shade of pink or whatever. So we kind of need to go with that to fit in. And so that's kind of sometimes a recipe for disaster if you just blend in and you can't be distinguished, right? I really like your all's tagline, or one of the taglines. I think it's we're on a mission to liberate ideas the world deserves, right? That liberate, right? That came to mind when you were saying, like, I know you like green, but how about something just crazy like pink? It's just like go out of the box. I like that a lot. Now I want to ask, I want to just assume that a client has come on, and I want to talk a little bit about deliverables. So I know now a little bit more of the process. Hopefully people are getting a feel for your all's process of verbiage, wording, what's important. Then we're moving into aesthetics. We're moving into conversations like color, all very helpful things to have before you open up an Illustrator file or something. So let's assume that a client has these deliverables. You're going to be responsible for branding like a logo, their subsequent visual identity, and let's just say a website or a shop, which I think you all do a fair amount of websites or web design. Once you have this document, this strategy doc in place, I want to know what's the North Star that you give to the team so that they can be designing efficiently. Because you mentioned, I like your, let's just assume that you're going to provide, I think you said 3 options or or something of that nature. Let's assume we're going the full package, whatever the full package is. Yeah. How do you, like, I feel like people are going to gather this idea from a client, whether they're freelance or starting their own thing, and they're going to do the same old, they're going to open up Illustrator, they're going to start surfing through fonts, they're going to start whatever, you know, it's, you know the drill. So I want to know what you give the designers as a North Star.
So we always do like a big team smash at the beginning of creative. And we obviously exclusively use Figma. So we do like a big Fig Jam smash. And then all we have are different sandboxes in Figma, and then everyone just like does their own thing. But I think we just use that brand idea. And so I use the example of Grow More Fuzz, which we use for Free Tree. And so I let people go off, and for a day or two, people just ideate, and I'm like, cool, from those 3 words. And it really helps when you have a really visual idea. And like when there's as designers, if you can pick up on like this fuzz or this grow, like let's just get whatever options. They might be really mad, like doesn't matter, just any refs, any options that you think like really embody this brand. And we try and start to bucket them into themes. And is it like fuzz that looks like really cartoonish, or is it like grow, like typography that grows? And then, and then we all get together. We just work out in some creative sessions which ideas we think are the best. And then we start to try and just refine those down, and then start to see like if some people have got similar themes, that's always a good sign. It's like, oh, okay, there's something in this, like maybe. But similarly, sometimes, the intern might have like just this really great idea, and you're like, that's brilliant, let's use that. So it's quite nice when you do have 3 different routes to work on. Even better when you've got territories, because you can have even more ideas, but then it makes it a bit more tough to decide between them, I suppose. But so it's just like keeping people really, really super focused on the brand idea, but not allowing room to experiment, but then pulling it back and being like, cool, okay, now we've gone really wide, let's pull it back in again, and then let's refine, then let's go wide, then let's refine. And then, and it's always really, it's really fun at the beginning. And then there's this, we call it like the pit of despair, when we're a few days in and you're trying to work out what the personality of each of these routes is going to be. And everyone's like, oh, we can't see it. And like, you have to work through it. And then you emerge a few days later. It always comes good. And then you've got a few more days to smash it out and like present to the client, and then everyone's really happy.
And then when we have those ideas, we're always referencing back to the strategy. So as well as the idea, we'll have a manifesto, which is kind of like a long form version of the brand idea, which fleshes it out a little bit and has some of that creative copywriting. We'll also have a personality kind of set as well. And so out of those ideas at each stage, when you're looking and assessing it, you're always looking back at that document to be like, okay, does this meet everything that we set out in the strategy? Does it tick all of the boxes? Okay, cool. That's our measure. That's our yardstick. And if we can tick everything off, cool, this is a true manifestation of that strategy in its own particular way. So yeah, that's the thing that we've always got to kind of keep bringing back and reminding all the time.
Yeah. And in this stage where you mentioned everybody's going to kind of take this and they're going to go away for a day or day and a half to whatever, what are you suggesting that this be ultra rough, like get out a piece of paper and just like kind of get everything out of your mind? Or like, do you know, I know my friend works at an agency out in Phoenix, and they do a very similar process, and they don't want anybody to use the computer for the first, like basically what you're saying is this, just, they call it like, I guess, a brain dump. And they just, if it looks absolutely awful, because that's what I'm trying to ask is like, I feel like a lot of people are not comfortable trying to draw something, whether it's type or whether it's an image or whether it's an icon. So what are you having them, or what are you suggesting they do? Or is it fine if they start messing around in the computer?
Yeah, I have never but like I've never made it like a big deal if someone wants to sketch, or if someone just feels more comfortable bringing refs in. What I think we try and do is not jump straight into the logo too soon, because I think it's really important for us to develop. The logo is almost something we do at the end, weirdly. Like the design system for us is the most important. Like what is that element that's going to like almost support the logo, like design the logo last, actually, because the logo should be like a distillation of the entire design system and brand idea. And you can only really get to that when you've like worked out loads of other stuff. So we always try and keep, and it's also the more tricky thing to get right. So generally, and the logo generally always, like it's quite rare we get it bang on right the first time anyway, so we always know there's going to be refinement, but what we're trying to do first is like really hone and nail the brand, the design system. So if people want to bring in type, if they want to start bringing like motion refs or indeed logo refs as well, icon refs, like that's great, that's fine, it's quite scrappy, but jumping straight into the logo is something that we don't like necessarily encourage at this particular point, because we want to work out everything
a lot
beforehand.
of the time it's kind of trying to encapsulate feeling, right? And it's like whatever thing you can find which expresses that concept and that feeling. Like when we're talking about, the grow the fuzz, it's like, okay, well, you've got fuzz, which has got a tactile kind of visual element to it, and you can see what fuzzy would be. But how would we express the growth element? Is it a fuzz which gets bigger? Is it does it like accumulate on the screen? Or, how does the things start to behave to kind of exude some of those character types? And so we do bring in lots of motion, because we work in motion, and that helps to express emotion. So it's a difficult thing to do with sketching. You have to kind of find loads of random things like videos or like, I don't know, like Renaissance art or, sculpture, or just, it could be anything that is like, okay, what solidity mean to you? Okay, well, what marble kind of statues, and, like it's all about just pulling on these different threads of ideas and pulling them all together.
Yeah, I think that might be, counter is not is too strong of a word. I think that might be a not similar process to what most people are thinking. I think that what a lot of designers, whether or not they're new, amateur, or maybe even pro, is, at least this could be completely conjecture, but what I think is that they want to solidify that flag, that beacon, that logo, so that they can take that and then make sure that the system reflects that. But what I really like is that you don't do that, and you're trying to see what the system looks like so that the logo reflects that, and then it makes sense. It reminds me, I was reading Marty Neumeier's Brand Gap recently for some design information I was putting together, and there's a section where he talks about what a logo is. Obviously, a logo is not a brand. Brand is not a logo. It's just a part of it. But he was mentioning, I don't want to misquote him, I would have to open up the book, but what he said, something like logo really means and or meant logo type. And so what a lot of brands, companies, agencies are using now is an avatar. And he's like, I'm pro avatar, which I believe would be like an icon or something like that. And then the logo still becomes a logo type of whatever the word is going to be, like your company name or something like that. So that's actually sounds really similar in that it's like, maybe we put too much stock in trying to nail the logo first and foremost without actually having a system.
Exactly. And actually it can lead to a lot of frustration, I think, because like you're right, Drew. Like it's like there's a distinction between having a word mark where your logo is the name of your company and that's just it. And it helps if you've got the name of a really short company, and like if you've got a really long company name, that's very difficult. And then what we call, the symbol or like the mark. And obviously with a lot of the tech companies that we work with, like it's also like the app icon. So that is actually really, really important. And so that little symbol is actually and then having that symbol work alongside a logo type, or not having a symbol at all and just having a word mark. And it's all, that's something that we all, again, depends per client, but it's something that we try and do when we understand the system and the brand more, because I think, like you said, like a logo is important, but it's not a brand, and the brand is the collection of all these. The whole is more than some of its parts.
Yeah.
And I think that just like almost not sweating the logo at the beginning is really useful, because you give yourself a little bit more time to get to know the brand and understand it more, and then there could be some really great things that emerge out of the design, the system, which then influence like what that market's going to look like. So
it's sort of coming back to what we're actually trying to do as a branding agency or as a designer creating a brand. You're not designing something visual. What you're doing is you're trying to create a set of emotions and associations in someone's mind. And so you've got to create that first in the design process and say, okay, what are the emotions that we're looking to convey, and what are things which will convey that emotion? And if it's something which is floaty, it's like it might be ethereal blends or whatever, and you can imagine those things free of thinking about how it's going to be used first. Make all of those associations, then say, cool, okay, well, if our thing is going to be a blend, okay, then maybe the logo can incorporate a blend inside the logo type or in the symbol or whatever it is. So you want to find the thing first, and then you can apply it to all of the different parts of the brand. And the logo is almost like the cordial of that idea. It's like the syrup. It's like the condensed version of that feeling and that concept all into one thing. So you kind of have to design everything and then condense it all down into that very pithy expression of it.
And how far do you go with this identity, with this visual representation, before? Because I don't want to jump straight into how do you present, because I'm very curious about that. I want to know before we get to everything that's packaged up so that we can present this to the client. How far does that go? Do you have like a core 5 to 6 pieces of a visual identity that we want to think about, like pattern, motion, color, you know what I mean? Or is it just like, we're just going to make sure that we have enough that fits what the idea of this brand is, then we're going to make the logo, then we're going to present? Like, I'm just kind of wondering, what's the core, how far do we go in the visual identity?
So when we're doing the three route options, we have templates that we use, so out of homes that we use, and we tend to always start with a logo reveal, then a logo in motion, then some messaging, then starting to see the logo in some brand or the brand in some brand world, so you can start to see the design system. Then we will look into, we'll show where the color palette came from. We'll look at typography, more out of homes, so that you can start to get, a sense of everything coming together. So we break everything down in the first bit, so that client starts to get their head around it. Okay, this is the look and feel. And then at the end, we have a section called Bringing It All Together. And this is when we like let our hair down and we're like lots of out of homes, digital applications, maybe some fictitious like websites, like front pages. But then depending on the client, for example, we just did one for a conservation charity, a zoo in England. We just did some like really exciting like Jeep mock-ups of safari trucks that are on the zoo. We did like lanyards because that was really appropriate. We did tickets to show, and we really we really went, like, I think the deck was just like 170 pages. So I think we slightly went overboard, and we booked an hour to show the client. We should have booked 2, but they were a little bit like, what? Like, but they loved it. But I think if I do it again, I'd probably make less, and you don't need as much. But I think we wanted to show loads of different applications because the brand was so rich and that the client, the company was so varied as well. But normally we have it, 20 to 30 different slides per route. And then we have a page at the end where we have like almost like a bento box page where we have the brand like all on one page. And then we have a page at the end of the deck where we compare all the 3 brands together, and we just sit there for a while with a client.
I think for a client, the important thing is being able to see the brand in the applications that matter to them. So if they're a digital product company, we might include some product screens of their existing product and it reskinned. We just had a client at the moment who we're talking to, and they're very digital, and they were like, just don't show us any billboards when you're doing the brand reveals, because we're never going to do a billboard. When you're showing a route, you can show all these individual bits, but if you don't show it all together, working together, then it's very hard for the client to kind of get their head around what it means and what the result is.
Yep.
That's an important thing. It's like, put it in a context that they're going to understand.
Let's ask how we're going to present. And you just mentioned a second ago, we book an hour for that particular presentation. Sounds like you might have done 3 for 100 something slides. So I want to know, because I feel like this might be a struggle as well for people. And I think some people have the idea that this is going to be a very straightforward kind of PowerPoint slide presentation. Some people may be on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, where they're going to put together a whole reel, something that's completely motion, right? Some sort of media, some sort of visual. Then there's probably a happy medium where you can do some interesting things with. I know there are presentation platforms that will kind of help you animate along, and it already sounds like, just from context clues, what you're not doing is opening up the presentation with all 3 logo options flat on a piece of paper for them to basically be like, which one do you like, A, B, or C? Here they are all together. It sounds like you have something similar at the very end, but also always heard that, you never want to just show it on the color, or never just show it on black and white. You really need to show the object, the representation in real life. That this needs to live. It needs to be alive. So maybe talk just a little bit more about how you're prepping the presentation, so that we can give people watching and listening a really good idea of what they should at least be reaching for or attempting for.
Yeah, cool. So what we always tend to do is we bring in a bit of the strategy beforehand and into the beginning of the deck. And we work in Pitch. We work with something called pitch.com, which is just like an online, it's really useful. But actually, we're starting to do more and more of our presentations just straight in Figma, which is great. And we always tee up the ideas with the strategy, just a few pages, nothing more, because obviously we've been through that with the client already. But just to be like, cool, this is where our ideas come from. We sometimes maybe might even show the competitor wheel, just to sort of, if we're going to go for something really wild in terms of color, it's like, cool, just we refresh, like this is like, maybe this is an option that we could explore, and you will see more in the deck. So it's an opportunity at the beginning. Instead of going straight in, it's like, start to get them involved in the story again. You might not have spoken to the client for like a couple of weeks, so just like a refresh. And then, I agree, it's definitely not going straight into the logo. It's really useful to have a narrative arc when you have with each one of the routes, because you want to get them into it like little, subtle. This is where this came from, and the rhino's horn here. This is something that then inspired this, and and boom, here's your logo. This is why it makes sense. So there is a bit of storytelling involved, and then just taking them on that journey of the brands, they can really understand it. And definitely at the end, it's really, really useful to have each of those three routes plotted, and we always ask at the end of each route if the client wants to talk about it, but we do prefer to just then have the session at the end where we ask them for their immediate thoughts, and we just sit on this page with all the 3 different options. And so, and in terms of presenting, if I've led something, I don't necessarily always want to be the one presenting. I really like to give it to my team, especially the designers or the lead designer on that route, if they want to, of course, but like present it themselves, because I think that it just also helps with their growth, but also they really understand it, and it's, I think it's just a really good opportunity for them to also grow. But we tend to have client services do the first bit, then I can do more of the intro and the strat. And if someone's off or someone can't make it or whatever, then I jump in and I can present a route. But we're always trying to get, the team to present and to have that experience with the client, which can be really nerve-wracking, obviously, but the more they do, the better they get. So
when I want to know more about the end. So you've gone through this presentation, you've made your case, so to speak, for these 3 options that you feel good about. What does that conversation look like at the end? Do you find more often than not they say, "Great, let me go back about or do they say it's A?
Yeah, I mean,
what you don't want is like silence.
Yeah.
Which has, I don't know if it has happened.
I mean, it does happen
before.
because like it's a lot of information, right? So you got to remember that you've just shown tons of stuff that they haven't seen, which you've been living for the last couple of weeks, developing, and So often they won't give immediate feedback, but what you're looking for is some kind of gut reaction, to be like, okay, what resonates, what doesn't. But you don't want it to put too much pressure either.
It's always really great as well when a team doesn't let the CEO go first or the founder go first, because we found that when the founder just sort of wades in and says, I don't like it, or, then the rest of the team tend to follow. So ideally we have this principle in our studio where the most junior person in the room gets to speak first, because often people get like a little bit like over like influenced by like, so that's really good when a good CEO would say, great, thank you for the presentation, team, like you go first, and they give their opinion at the end just to not like color things. But there's always a favorite, I think, and we always discuss before we go into presentation like which is the one we all like, and we always like, there's always like a collective decision in the team, and generally we always agree. So we're quite often asked as well by clients, oh, which one would you prefer? Which one would you choose?
Really? Okay.
And and we're like, the jury's still out as to whether when we know that we really think something's really good, we say, oh, well, we love them all, but like this one is quite distinctive and very disruptive in the space, and this one I think would really work. But we tend to try not to do that because, effectively we should be like agnostic in those routes. But when it feels right, we do sort of influence things a bit as well if we feel like it's the right decision.
Most of the time there's a clear reason and differentiation between the routes. So you can say, okay, well, if we want to lean into this part of the strategy more, then that's what that would look like. Or if we want to, so you're almost giving the team the choice of saying, okay, what is most important for the company, and what direction do they want to go? And you've given them the options to be able to visualize what it looks like if they do become the disruptor in the market. This is what that could look like. Okay. Or if they want to be a little bit more kind of corporate, then that might be what it looks like. Or do you see what I mean? So you're kind of giving clear decisions rather than like they're all completely like I don't know, abstract in the way that they're kind of developed. So usually when you can talk about the merits of each one and say, okay, well, this one would be appropriate if X, Y, and Z, and this one would be more appropriate if, some other scenario of what you're looking to do as a company. And so that's like the reason why we develop them, right? It's so that we can kind of help them visualize what it looks like for them to behave in a particular way. So,
and in this scenario where you have just too much love for all three, like the client does, and they're like, oh, I've got to have this from A with this from B. Can you talk about how you navigate visions and because there's a part of like you just mentioned, you just walked through, basically it's educating the client on what they don't know. I feel like sometimes there's an aspect where you have to be like, well, if we do that, you are going to destroy this.
Yeah. So what we don't want is like a Frankenstein brand, or from the outset. And I think it is, and this is like one of those like really, it's so difficult to explain how you can navigate something like this, because it's about also knowing in your own head, maybe as a creative director, like whether that amount of like Frankensteining could still have a brand that could survive that. And sometimes you're like, oh, well, maybe that could work still. Like maybe that could work. And other times you have to say, I really don't think that would work. Or we could show you some options. But and that's when we show some options and then say, but we still think this works, which means that, the client still feels that they have had a voice and a part of the conversation. Like we had a CMO who was like really, she was great, but she was really, really strong-willed, and she just wanted pink. And they were like a tech company, like selling mortgages, and she just wanted pink. And the rest of her team were like,
Wow.
No. And we were like, what? Just why? And she's like, I just really like pink. Everything is in my house is pink. And we were like, okay, but this is like, so but she was so strict. And obviously I knew that wasn't going to work, but we had to just take her on a bit of a journey and say, cool, we can show you some options, but then we feel like maybe what we had before with the green is probably, working better. And she eventually was like, oh yeah, I get it. And her team, but I think she felt like she needed to have a voice. And I think it's at moments like that when you still know that it might not work, but you want to give, you have to give it a little bit to also get back, and then never completely push back on stuff unless it's like,
It's like,
yes,
but it's quite a good way around that.
And actually sometimes we've had some great feedback from clients and we smashed some things together and actually it works. So I'm always really open to having just that little extra, it's definitely not like this is the only way and this is the vision. You've got to be open-minded still.
It really depends on the concept and the execution of the concept, and whether those two things from two different routes can be put together and still make sense, because what you're trying to do is make sure that it makes sense and it's clear. It's worth saying as well, once we present something like this, we'll give the client a few days to kind of go and digest it and think about it and sit with it for a while and discuss with the team and everything. And then we try and get them to give us consolidated feedback so that we have very clear direction of what is the brokered opinion between them, rather than
that's a really
taking
useful
feedback
thing
from lots of different people on their side.
That would really help listeners, I think, is that we found when we first started, we didn't have any of the process, but now we actually have like a Google Doc, super simple, but with questions on what do you think about the logo? What do you think about the color? And it's broken down, because then that we can just compartmentalize everything. And I think before we were like, what do you think? And they were like, and then you have these long lines about everything and you couldn't really unpick the feedback. And I think having feedback like boxed, so you can be like, okay, cool, they're actually happy about the logo. Because sometimes just like a couple of words means, oh, the logo looks too sharp, or the logo looks, and you're like, and that's good advice, because you can sort of visualize how you could work that. But quite often, you get very, especially when it's feedback from lots of different people.
Right, or something like
the
that.
logo's just not really working for me. And you're like, hey, what do you mean by that? So it's really good when you can then say, cool, could you just add a little bit more to the logo section, please? Because we don't really understand. Or like, cool, we understand what you like about color. And that, I think, has really helped our process, because then we can, then you can really action that feedback.
So that was too much. That was a scenario where there's too much love. You guys are just too good. But I would like to know, feel free. If you have to pass on the question, I get it.
No, I think I know what's coming.
Sink or swim. Have you ever been in a project where a client is just complete no's, just across the board? No, like this is just not it. And if so, can you walk us through how you handled that?
Yeah, it's interesting because
totally.
The scenario where that happens usually is because the client hasn't understood the implication of the strategy. And so they might have signed off on a strategy, but not realized the implication of that strategy, because then we've used that as our North Star. And then they're like, oh no, this isn't right. And then when you unpick it, it comes back to the strategy. And then and it's something that they signed off, but didn't quite understand that it would lead them in a particular direction. So that's something that we've started providing more information at the strategy phase on. What would be the creative implication of this strategy? Maybe a mood board, maybe more description of how we might interpret this strategy, to make sure they really understand that if they're signing that off, what then we are going to go and do after that. That's how because the strategy is the point where you're trying to like avoid that scenario, because that's the blueprint that you're working to. So usually, if that's happened in the past, it's because there's been a
misunderstanding. And then you go back to the strat and then you're like, oh, but this was, this is what we signed on. And they're like, no, like this is so different. We are this and that. And we're like, oh. And so the language then, or the expectations that aren't managed. And we've actually started now including some visual refs when we when we show the strategy, like I was saying before, just so that we can start to, the client actually can visualize a little bit of what we're actually going to do, because we're like, right, if we're going to do this, we've got to do it properly. You know, we've got to really go for it. And clients are like, yeah, of course. And then they actually want something a lot more tame. And we also did have, I think it was when we were doing the Hotjar rebrand, and I think this is totally fine to mention it, but when they were an amazing company to work with actually, and we still work with them now. But when we did the rebrand like 2 or 3 years ago, I think we did, we were scored when we did our first creative share, and it was good because that's what they do. They do lots of user testing, and that makes sense. And so all the team scored all the different routes out of 5 or 10, I can't remember. And actually, it was the CEO who really hated, he didn't like anything. But it was really interesting because his team, he got just he's not the CEO anymore. There's a lovely guy called Mo, but the CEO was also lovely. But it was just one of those things where he was like, "I'm sorry, guys, I just don't get it," and we were like, but he was like, but actually the team all scored the different ones highly. So because he was the only one that didn't look.
We also went through, because they're a user testing.
It was a very democratic
company,
process.
We actually tested the routes with their end consumers as well.
Wow, that's super cool.
And which was actually amazing, because then the route which was the best actually went through, and it's exactly the scenario that Hotjar is trying to avoid, and they are kind of evangelical about this thing called Hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion kind of winning out. And they had exactly that scenario, and their processes kind of avoided it.
Yeah,
it meant that the brand really worked. And so the CEO had to be like, you know, I don't like it, but you know,
I get it.
I'm overruled, you know? So actually
that was really interesting.
It was like a kind of rare scenario.
I just think that's, I mean, once you've gone through that process several times, yes, it's still off-putting as you just mentioned, but it's still more like, okay, I've been around this, I know what to do. But I feel like everybody's worst nightmare is that happens, especially if they're a beginner or a freelancer, and there's not this big team they've got behind them, and they're just pitching to 3 or 4, you know, and then they're just like, I hate it, you know. It's just like,
sucks. And it does happen. And I think, you know, it's really difficult to get negative feedback on creative because it's such a personal and emotional thing. And you really want to please, and you really want to do your best job. And I think obviously rejection is never good. And I think we always have a debrief afterwards if anything goes wrong. And I try and also just be there as well on calls. And if I feel like maybe someone's just not you know, being particularly nice or like being a bit too harsh, I always try and counter that and make sure that particularly people who have presented in the team who might be a bit nervous and the work isn't liked or something, that we're still there to you know, protect them and shield them. Not that happens often, but I think it's like, it's really, it's tough when stuff isn't liked. And I think it's just about, growing a thick skin and understanding that we'll get there, and it's just part of the process. And it's like, cool, okay, well, this was just the first iteration, and we're going to work on it some more, and like taking it on the chin, and then just then just working into the feedback again and just iterating until you get somewhere that works, hopefully.
And I guess it's always trying to get more useful feedback than I don't like it. I don't like it is not valid feedback for us. We're just like, okay, why? What do you mean? Like, what is it specifically? And you have to get specifics from people, because
and not being afraid to ask for those specifics, because it actually will make your job easier in the long run if you actually do.
I can't hit a target that you can't specify, right?
For sure.
Well, tell me a little bit about the Los Angeles office. I mean, this has been great. I hope everybody's getting tons of value from this. I certainly am, but I want to know what's just going on for you all, and exciting things coming up, and work, and just tell me about the new location, everything going on.
Well, we've been working with West Coast clients for years, and we've been coming over a lot. Roger spent many months out here last year, and so we've been operating it as like a satellite location for a while. We've had freelancers work here, and we had like a contractor who was with us for several months as well. So we've been like in this like primitive proto state here for like almost 18 months. But because we work with so many people here, we just like the late night calls. We're just getting quite a lot. So Roger and I, we moved here 2 weeks ago. It's great. We love it.
Fresh.
And obviously because we know LA quite well, it hasn't felt like that much of a big jump. And because we're always, we're talking with people, the time difference thing, we've already sort of, worked that out anyway. But we are really excited. And the plan is to grow the LA team. We obviously have our main team in London currently, but we would love, that this is what we're here to do. So grow the team here, and just, take it from there really.
Wow, nice. So the idea would be then to scale the LA office up to what is currently the London office, right? So they're still operating as business, right?
Yeah, they're our primary office and all production for the company. At the moment happens in London. We have an amazing team over there, and we're over here to just start that growth. And as Kat said, the difficulty is the time zone. It's a full working day out, so there's only 1 hour of crossover pretty much that we have with the London team. And so that's the same for our clients, right? So we need to make sure that we can, service the clients here in their usual work hours, and we're not kind of restricting them to, an hour at the beginning of their day, or, I know people get up earlier over on the West Coast. So, people get on early morning calls, but we always feel that it's quite restrictive. That's also the idea. We want to get in the time zone and get in amongst people here, and work with more local companies here, really.
Yeah.
So is there I just want to know if there's anywhere that you want to direct people to. I know your all's blog is amazing, or the news, I believe it's called the news section. You all are active on LinkedIn, I think you've both done conferences before. Is there anything new and exciting coming up that people should know about?
Yeah, Kat's got a few things coming up this year, don't you?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I'm going all over the shop actually. I'm doing a talk in Budapest as part of the Point of View Festival, which is quite cool. And then I'm doing the brand new conference, speaking at that in Utah, in Salt Lake City. I think that's in October, which is really cool. I'm also speaking at Web Summit in Lisbon in November.
Nice.
So that's good. It's got three things currently, which is nice, and all over the world, which is also means that I like that.
We're also working on a podcast that I'm going to be presenting, which is it's called The Nugget. It's
nice.
Basically interviews with founders and how they've scaled their companies, how they've gone through the challenges of growing business. That's a really interesting new development. I've been getting all of those interviews in for that, launching September time.
Well, to both of you, thank you so much. This was seriously an honor to get to hang out with both of you. And I hope everybody watching and listening got as much value. Of course, I've got everything linked in the description for everyone to check out. Check them out, follow on LinkedIn. Just the website is amazing. Just the type of work, the visuals, it's up there. It's God tier, I think. It's pretty great. So everybody definitely needs to check that out, portfolio wise. But yeah, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Definitely don't forget to subscribe to the Kittl YouTube channel. If you've watched this far and you haven't, I don't know what you're doing. Please subscribe. And the last thing I want you all to do before you leave is, if there was something that we talked about or something that either of them mentioned that you want to learn more about, please comment that below, because that gives us more fuel, that gives them more to talk about, gives me more to talk about. So please comment down below so we can keep this conversation going. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.
See ya.
Bye.